Hi everyone. Welcome to the Minoru Yasui Legacy event. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Alicia Shindo. I am the Minoru Yasui Fellow for this year. I'm just going to go through kind of like the flow of the event, and then we will show a video just to have you guys gain some background on Minoru Yasui. So, first of all, um, I will introduce the panelists after I will introduce the panelists' bios after the video, but first of all, we have Weston, Mr. Koyama, and then Mr. Kodachi and Miss Yogi. Like I said, I will go into their bios more deeper after the video. And then we will have some planned questions for the panelists. And then we will have questions from the audience, and then we will wrap up our event. So thank you so much.
In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, the American public was locked in a state of fear. Never before had the country been attacked so suddenly by a foreign adversary on its own soil. The nation fired on all cylinders, working towards the cause of preserving American democracy. Fearful and defensive, Americans sought unity through scrap metal drives, victory gardens, and gas rations, but also through propaganda campaigns targeting people of Japanese ancestry. Japanese Americans were depicted as dangerous saboteurs who were subversive to the war effort, a sentiment that was reinforced by rampant misinformation and xenophobia. In Portland, Oregon, a young attorney worked furiously to resolve the new legal challenges faced by his community. A second-generation Japanese American, Minoru Yasui, had been raised on the orchards of Hood River, Oregon, where a wave of immigrants settled in the early 1900s against the idyllic backdrop of the Columbia River. As the century progressed, the community in Hood River found itself the subject of increasing antagonism from the general public. The economic success of Hood River's orchards, combined with the widespread belief that the Japanese were unassimilable, caused many to resent the newfound community.
In 1917 in Oregon, the first bill for an anti-alien land law in Oregon was actually submitted by the Hood River senator. And 2 years later, Hood River formed an anti-alien association.
It was in this uncertain environment that Yasui grew up. He excelled in school, becoming the first American citizen of Japanese descent to graduate from the University of Oregon School of Law and to pass the Oregon Bar. A second lieutenant in the ROTC, Yasui reported for military duty after Pearl Harbor, but was turned away because of his heritage. In the weeks following, the government began arresting Japanese community leaders, subjecting them to hours of searches and interrogations. Among those arrested was Yasui's father, Masuo, who was taken to a detention camp in Montana. Evidence used against him included children's drawings of the Panama Canal, which the authorities believed was proof of espionage. Tides continued to shift against the Japanese Americans as the government ramped up its efforts to restrict the population. The man leading the charge was Lieutenant General John DeWitt, who had previously spent over 4 decades in uniform. Stern and uncompromising, DeWitt would stop at nothing to protect the West Coast against what he saw as a dire military threat.
He also said to a congressional committee, quote, a Jap's a Jap, unquote. And the type of racism that he's expressing is that because of genetics or blood, you are destined to be disloyal.
DeWitt's radical ideas eventually made their way to the White House. On February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, delegating unilateral power to DeWitt and other military leaders. DeWitt, now with the force of the executive order behind him, passed a series of military proclamations in the following weeks. Among these was a curfew, requiring all persons of Japanese ancestry to remain in their homes after 8 p.m. The curfew stood as another manifestation of the public's fear, a legitimization of the country's distrust toward the Japanese.
Makes you feel inferior. It makes you singled out. It makes your ethnic group degraded, demoralized.
Minoru Yasui believed the curfew order to be not only a violation of his personal liberties, but a betrayal of the spirit and letter of the Constitution. But to challenge this barrier of injustice meant facing the full force of the US government, a daunting task for a young attorney. Yet his resolve did not waver.
I felt that we owed at least the obligation as a citizen to tell our government they are wrong. That is the sacred duty of every citizen. Because what is done to the least of us can be done to all of us. I knew that we had to protest this.
On a Saturday night in March of 1942, Yasui left his law office to take a walk in downtown Portland, deliberately violating the curfew. At only 25 years old, Yasui was willing to sacrifice his life and liberty to fight for justice.
I walked for over 3 hours, and during that period, I got tired of walking up and down Third Avenue, so I did approach a police officer.
So he went up to the policeman, asked to be arrested, and the policeman said, "Go home, Sonny, you're gonna get in trouble."
So he actually walked into the Portland police station and said, "Here are my papers. I'm Japanese American. It's after the curfew. Please arrest me."
The sergeant obliged me and he threw me into the drunk tank. So that's how the case began at 11:20 p.m., 28th day of March, 1942.
At his trial, the judge sentenced him to a year in prison and a $5,000 fine. He was held in solitary confinement for 9 months in a 6-by-8-foot windowless cell. Yasui kept fighting, ultimately bringing his case before the Supreme Court. The court heard his case alongside a similar one, Hirabayashi v. United States, in which a student in Washington was convicted of violating the same curfew that Yasui had a month earlier. In the trial, the government argued that the curfew was a military necessity and that certain racial characteristics of Japanese Americans justified the order. With a unanimous ruling on June 21st, 1943, Yasui's conviction was upheld. Having served his sentence, Yasui traded one prison for another. He was taken to Minidoka Relocation Center, where he and thousands of Japanese were incarcerated until the end of the war. Conditions in the camp were bleak.
I'm listening. I hear men whispering. I hear babies crying. I hear women weeping. What am I listening to? I am listening to the sounds of shattered lives. Shattered lives. 120,000 Japanese.
Upon release, Yasui moved to Denver, Colorado, where he continued to fight for civil rights. With the Japanese American Citizens League, he lobbied against racist legislation and chaired the National Committee for Redress, uniting individuals across the nation in the campaign for a government apology and restitution for wartime incarceration.
Not because it affected 120,000 Japanese Americans, but it affects all Americans.
In 1983, Yasui, along with a team of lawyers, petitioned to reopen his World War II case, citing new evidence suggesting the curfew was not based on military necessity, but on race. The district court vacated his conviction, but refused to rule on the issue of racial discrimination. Yasui persisted, once again appealing his case. Over 40 years after he broke the curfew in downtown Portland, Yasui was still determined to right the wrongs committed by the government. But on November 12th, 1986, Yasui died from cancer while waiting for his case to be heard. His ashes were buried beneath a pair of giant cedars in his hometown of Hood River. Just 2 weeks after his passing, the Supreme Court declined to hear his case, ruling it moot since the petitioner was deceased. His decades-long legal battle had come to an end. However, Minoru Yasui's legacy carried on. 2 years after his death, President Reagan issued a formal apology and reparations for victims of incarceration, marking a victory for the redress movement. In 2015, Yasui was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the country. And a year later, the Oregon legislature designated March 28th, the day he broke the curfew, as Minoru Yasui Day, immortalizing his act of courage.
I think his legacy is that as one person, you can literally change the world.
Was committed to justice. He was committed to his family, community.
He fought for us.
At just 25 years old, Minoru Yasui put his reputation, career, and personal liberties on the line to challenge the government's wrongdoing. For Yasui, fighting against injustice was not a choice, but an obligation. He lived life by a simple motto, one he would often repeat. We are born into this world for a purpose, to make it a better place for our having been there. As old barriers persist and new barriers emerge, Yasui's actions serve as an example to all. It begins with an act of courage, even something as simple as a late night stroll.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to introducing the panelists, like I said. So first of all, we have Mr. Koyama. He served as the first inaugural Minoru Yasui Fellow. He started his career in the Oregon Department of Justice Honors Attorney Program. And in addition to his law practice, Mr. Koyama is an adjunct professor at Portland Community College and runs Koyama Enterprises, an IT support and advice business. He volunteers with the Epworth Japanese Church and serves on the Portland Japanese American Citizens League Board of Directors. Mr. Koyama holds a BS, Bachelor of Science degree from Portland State University and a JD from the University of Oregon School of Law. Mr. Kodachi is a lawyer in private practice in Portland. Prior to establishing Kodachi Law, he worked for large and mid-sized firms in Portland and Hawaii. An active community leader, Mr. Kodachi's board service has included the Japan-America Society of Oregon, the Portland Japanese Garden, and the Portland chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. He is also a three-time competitor on the American Ninja Warrior television show. Mr. Kodachi earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Oberlin College and a JD from Lewis and Clark School of Law. Ms. Yogi volunteers with the Japanese Association of Lane County Sacred Heart Hospice and the Eugene Springfield Community Emergency Response Team. She is actively involved with smaller groups to defend our communities against social injustice. Ms. Yogi retired from the University of Oregon after 36 years as management staff, with the last 22 years in the Knight Library. She earned her BSS degree in journalism during the radical 1960s. So now we're going to move on to our panelists and possible with questions that they are going to discuss. So the first question being, is there anything that you think we should know about Minoru Yasui's legacy that was not captured in the short film? And then we will start with Mr. Kodachi. That would be great.
Well, thank you, one, for inviting all of us to join you today. In terms of something that was not captured, I would say the need for an individual to act. Now, it was stressed towards the end by his quote, but I really think that it's one person's effort, one person's willingness to correct a wrong. And it takes tremendous courage, absolutely tremendous courage. And in preparation for today, I took a look at the testimony that he had submitted as a part of the national redress, which was referred to. And there was a quote that he had written that I think capture that spirit. And if you just indulge me just for a second, I'm gonna read his own words. These are not my words. He had written, as a matter of hindsight, paraphrasing Justice Owen Roberts of the US Supreme Court, I was born of parents to whom I had no choice, and of an ancestry from which I cannot resign. To impose penalties on such a basis does not only shock the consciousness and outrage my sense of justice, but deeply undermines the very foundations of our American democracy. It seemed to me then, as it seems to me now, that it is my responsibility to try to set my country's right. If I believe we're wrong, it is not somebody else's responsibility. We cannot expect others to fight our battles for us unless we ourselves are willing to walk that lonesome road alone in the conviction of the righteousness of our stand. And so to me, that captures the essence of the film that may not have been fully developed in 15 minutes.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that Ms. Yogi or Ms. Koyama want to add? That'd be great.
I would like to add, I've been here long enough that I did meet Min Yasui back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and he was really intense. And he was not, you know, the warm grandpa kind of guy. He was very intent on his mission, and I can identify with him now, and I am grateful to have his legacy of action and endurance because it is so necessary in this day. The thing that I kind of, it occurred to me that yes, it was an individual battle or an individual fight and campaign. However, what I see and what I see us doing today is working with our community for our community. And I believe that was also inherent in Minoru Yasui's legacy and his actions and his life is our community. He came out to stand up for us, and it remains our legacy also and our work today.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. Koyama?
Oh, thank you again for inviting us here. It's great to see such young, bright, optimistic faces at law school. It's been a while since I've been here, and I really appreciate the honor of being able to speak before you all. I would say that this was certainly mentioned in the film, but I'd like to really impress on you that Min Yasui was a lawyer. And that makes him different from Gordon Hirabayashi and Fred Korematsu. I think Fred Korematsu and Gordon Hirabayashi are brave, and their courage is laudable and is lauded. But I would also impress on you the extra amount of courage it would take to come from a legal background, to have that legal training, to be well aware and cognizant of the full force and power of the police state against you. As a public defender, I work as a public defender now. I can tell you that the courage to stand up to the police state is immense. And you know, Gordon Hirabayashi, Fred Korematsu may not have known fully what they were getting themselves into. I can almost guarantee you that Min Yasui knew exactly what he was getting into. He did it anyway. And so I'm not saying that I would have done the same thing. I don't know if I would have. My ancestors did it. But I would say that it is extra admirable for someone of that legal training to put that on the line you know, not just his liberty, but his career, his law license. That is something that we all do every day.
Great, thank you so much. We will move on to our second question. How has Minoru Yasui's legacy impacted you in your actions? And we'll go the other way. So if Mr. Cookhouse, you can start and then just go.
You know, I worked at the Oregon Department of Justice for a time and was deeply involved in the state's efforts to preserve convictions on appeal. I represented the state of Oregon before the Oregon Court of Appeals. And I saw a lot of things that I don't know if I would say they shocked the conscience, but they certainly tugged at my heartstrings and made me question what I was doing. I think that the lesson I take away from Mr. Yasui is that you really have to believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing. If you don't believe in what you're doing, you have to be doing something different because you're gonna burn out real quick. I can tell you that, you know, having worked on the prosecution side, I could never go back to the prosecution side, ever again. I am proud to call myself a public defender today, and I say that with a little bit of sadness that, you know, I don't feel that the police state is really out for our best interests. I think that you know, the work of Minoru Yasui, to me, I look at his legacy, I look at him standing up for what he believed in and standing true to his convictions. I think you have to do that in the legal practice. You're all going to become lawyers eventually, and you're going to have to ask yourself, you know, how do I want to use the talents that I've gained from my education here at law school? Think about that real carefully, because I know there's a lot of people who go into the legal profession and they, you know, find the job that's going to make them the most money or give them the most accolades or the most recognition, what have you. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to ask yourself, is this where my soul is? Is this where my heart and soul is? And if it's not, you gotta find something different. So, you know, I'm fighting a good fight as a public defender, and you know, I hope you'll join me.
Okay, yeah, and this is kind of well, I have a long history in Eugene and Springfield. After I graduated from college, maybe in the late 80s, the Asian American community began to organize. We had, it was mainly a generational thing. Our kids were growing up. They had no representation in the local community, and we decided for the kids, we would form the Asian American Council. We started the Oregon Asian Celebration, which was the only Pan-Asian festival in the state of Oregon. But we decided we wanted to showcase our Asian American values, what we held, what we brought, and what we held currently, the values. And so we did that, and proudly so. We enjoyed it and educating our kids and in the culture and then in long about the 2016 election, we began to see the targeting that was happening to all the communities of color, and especially, and so by the 2020 Oregon Asian Celebration, now we had been doing it for 30-something years, and the 2020 Asian Celebration, we were subjected to misinformation and harassment, and our children were hearing things. We actually had our volunteers say, you know, I can't I can't participate, I'm afraid. We had already had mass shootings in synagogues and schools, and the steering committee for the Asian celebration said, we are going to proceed, and this is where I took my Min Yasui resilience and proceeded to, we are going to do this because we are proud of our community. We are showing our children that we have earned this. People are looking forward to this, and so we held it, and that was because of COVID. It was the last Asian celebration at the Lane Event Center, but we held our community together, and we held their trust. So, and that was something that we absolutely learned from them.
Personally, looking at Min Yasui, it's just so much. He cast such a big shadow. It's so courageous, and for me, the lesson is to take a stand, to get involved. And I can give 2 examples. For me, it was right after 9/11, and there was a rampant fear of hysteria, fear of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, and it was, I think, within weeks that the Portland Japanese American Citizens League held a event. It was a dialogue for understanding, and somebody had asked me to participate, and I thought, well, sure, I'd love to participate, but I practice immigration law, I'm not a civil rights attorney. But at the same time, I realized there weren't that many Japanese American lawyers. And so as Weston had mentioned, all of you are receiving this wonderful legal education, and that will distinguish you from others within your respective communities. So I would encourage you to get involved in your respective communities to make the world a better place, to quote Min. And the second example was fairly recent. About two years ago, there was a brutal attack by a gentleman named, I think it was Dylan Kesterson, where he pummeled a young Japanese couple and their, I think, 4-year-old, 6-year-old daughter, right along the riverbanks in Portland. He was arrested, and I think the person said, the victim said he was punched over 50 times and his child was beaten as well. But Kesterson was arrested and he was released the very same day. And it hit the news, and I thought, oh, that's crazy. And it turns out that Oregon's criminal justice system, of which I had no background or no training really, other than taking criminal law, just like you in school, but procedurally, bias crime in the first degree was not listed on the Supreme Court order as a non-releasable offense. There were only certain violent crimes that, like domestic violence, if you were charged with that, you had a clean record, you would not be released. And unfortunately, bias crime in the first degree was not listed. And so that really struck a nerve with me. And so I, along with several other community members, organized, and we ultimately got about 15 Asian, non-Asian groups as well to petition to write to the Supreme Court to add bias crime, which it took about a year, but they ultimately added bias crime as a non-releasable offense.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on to our next question. As you think about our current times, do you see heightened risks of discrimination reminiscent of the 1940s? And what conditions do you see that inform your response? And we'll start with Ms. Yogi this time.
Thank you. However, I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to start.
As far as today and sort of similarities, I do think there is similarities in the sense that what I think we're seeing is sort of scapegoating of fear, hysteria of people of color. You have in the video, the Japanese were portrayed in the media as saboteurs, very suspicious. And today, you had President Trump say, the illegal immigrants are dangerous hombres, right? And so I was just watching CNN just last night, and there was just this tenor of the discussion. Every immigrant is a criminal, and you just have to justify that if you're an immigrant, you're not a criminal. And so it seems to me there's a real shift occurring within the public discourse that criminal is the equivalent of an illegal or an undocumented immigrant. So I think there's a real danger in that perpetuation of that type of image.
Mr. Koyama, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that in our current political climate, there is a lot of scapegoating, a lot of pointing fingers at people. But I want to address something that Mr. Odachi mentioned before with regard to Mr. Kesselstrom. He is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And I want to really emphasize that his case is still pending. He is currently going through a process called aid and assist, which is a process where if we don't believe that you're competent to stand trial, then there's a process to go through that to make sure that you're competent to stand trial. He's going through that process. So I wouldn't peg him as guilty, and certainly the notion of bias crimes is very real. It's something that happens, but until we know all the facts and circumstances around, what motivated him, what caused him to be provoked to do that attack, I would just withhold judgment on that. I would also note that, I do serve on the board of JACL. I helped translate a letter to the general counsel who was attacked on that day. So I do know something about what happened. But again, I think a lot of the rush to judgment that happens in the aftermath of these incidents is also kind of the same rush to judgment that would have us target an immigrant community or people who look different than us. So I just put that out there, that, people who are accused of doing some pretty horrific things, pretty terrible things, they are presumed innocent. And we should grant that presumption to him because we don't know what was going on in his head. Maybe he was motivated, full of hate, maybe not. But there is an aid and assist process before he even gets to stand trial for those actions that he allegedly did. Sorry, that was a little bit sidetracked, but I didn't want to lose sight of that, kind of the public defender in me screaming out, to give people some mercy, where we can.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your input. And our last question is going to be, what are steps that law students and young lawyers like us can take to continue Minoru Yasui's legacy and to reflect the legacy by displaying the values that Minoru Yasui advocated for his whole entire career? So if Ms. Yogi, if you wanna start.
Okay. Okay, to the first question, to the first, part of the question, what are steps that law students and young lawyers can take to continue Minoru Yasui's legacy? Like Mr. Gadachi was saying, get involved, show up wherever you see injustice. And I have the organization Sudo for Solidarity that was featured on this documentary right at the end. That's a very golly, an important organization that I participated in because they were sending teams down in the last, I think 5 years ago, they started sending teams of say internment camp survivors and support to the border, to the Texas border, to help the immigrants and refugees coming across the border who was subjected to the Border Patrol and Homeland Security, detention centers, separation of children from their families. They went into, like the American Friends Service Committee, to stand between Homeland Security and their support. And so very remarkable. We sent funding in to support their efforts. They also, the Biden administration wanted to expand on the detention centers and they protested. They wanted to expand into Fort Sill, which was an internment camp during the war, and also an incarceration site for the wars against the Apache or the other Native Americans. So they were successful in stopping that. They continue, branches of Sudo for Solidarity continue to want or desire the protesting for the closure of the detention center in Tacoma, where last year 2 inmates, immigration inmates, died in incarceration due to neglect. So the campaign continues, and I say if they're a great organization to volunteer for. You can sign up and volunteer if you don't have a whole lot of time, or you can go out there and join the protest. They're also active in the San Francisco Bay Area. As far as reflecting on the legacy of displaying values, I'd like to point out something I recently discovered, although it's news that's a year and a half old, and it involves Barack Obama. I'm from Hawaii, and Barack Obama was born in Honolulu and spent much of his childhood in Honolulu. And so in relation to men, we know that he awarded men the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015, I believe it is, and for his work for social justice. And in 2016, Mr. Obama traveled to Japan to meet with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and together they visited the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park. And that visit was the first by an American president since the end of the war, 80 years before, the first visit. This created the impetus for what happened on June 29, 2023, just a year and a half ago. On that day, Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, met with Hiroshima Mayor Matsui Kazumi to sign a sister park agreement between the Pearl Harbor National Memorial Park and the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. This was a huge reconciliation of history, and here's what Rahm Emanuel said. These parks, which were once sites of conflict, are now places of reconciliation, while historical battles, they define our character. They can inform and influence our future choices. This new sister park agreement will expand the community of Americans and Japanese who visit Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima, learn their histories, and chart a better pathway forward. As I wrote in the guest book at the Hiroshima Peace Park last year, the lessons of Hiroshima must be our North Star, guiding us to a world free of war and open to peace. That is equally true for Pearl Harbor. So, former President Barack Obama wrote, "My visit to Hiroshima and Prime Minister Abe's visit to Pearl Harbor were key signs in deepening the alliance between our two nations. This agreement today marks another historical accomplishment. By connecting our two peoples to our shared past, we can build a shared future grounded in peace and cooperation." This agreement was a reconciliation and healing for my family history. My father at the time was working for the Navy at Pearl Harbor, building the fuel supply depot for the fleet. And on December 7, 1941, he was dockside at Pearl Harbor. He saw the warplanes coming over and dropping their torpedoes. They were trying to kill him because he was American. And 2 months later, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed his Executive Order 9066 mandating the removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, his sister, my Auntie Flo, was a student at Oregon State University in Corvallis, 23 years old. And she was told she was going to be removed and taking only what she could carry. She was going to be imprisoned at Minidoka in Idaho. And for 3 years, my grandparents did not know where she was or hear from her until the end of the war. And I grew up a Cold War baby. For 50 years, we had an arms race. For 50 years, we were under the specter of annihilation. And this agreement, the acknowledgement of what we had done to each other, this agreement and a commitment to peace means everything, everything.
Great, thank you so much for your input, Ms. Yogi, and honestly, like your personal story, that was very touching. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything, Mr. Kodama or Mr. Kodachi, you would like to add?
On the question of what you can do, I'll keep it simple. Consider public defense. I mean that in all seriousness. We have a shortage of public defenders in Oregon. There may be ways to pay back your loan by going into public defense. But I mean, from my perspective, really we have a war on poverty in this country. And that obviously impacts certain groups of people, minoritized groups of people more severely, but even people who are not minoritized, it impacts. And I would say as a public defender, sometimes you're going to be working with unsavory people who have not had an equal opportunity for enlightenment that you've all had. But you'll also be working with people who really are, the targets of systematic oppression. And I think that it's a rewarding career. Certainly, it's a career that echoes my core values as an American and as someone who was affected by the wartime actions of the United States government. My family was also incarcerated at Minidoka. I know a thing or two about the power of police state violence. So I mean that in all seriousness, definitely consider a career in public defense.
I would just echo or repeat my comment, just get involved. When you may be getting this already right now, so-and-so's going to law school to be a lawyer. Oh, you must know everything, and you have 15 questions from your neighbor, your cousin, right? What does this mean? But once you get involved, whatever passion you have, maybe it's plants, maybe it's animals, whatever it is, people are gonna look to you as the expert, because you're a lawyer, right? And so, one, don't fall into the trap that you need to know everything, because you don't, right? But you have the skill, you'll have the skill of being able to figure things out, right? How to research an issue, how to spot issues. And so take those skills that you're learning and, as Min said, try to make the world a better place.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Kodaji and Mr. Koyama. That was a great introduction into our next part of the event, and we'll ask for questions from the audience. So we'll have we have some time set aside for that. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and we'll.
I'm going to come around with the mic because we do have a live stream audience.
I think this is probably a question for Miss Yogi. As co-director of the law schools of Tulsa, do you have some ways that we could get involved, like locally?
I'm sorry. As director of what organization?
The Asian Pacific American Law Student Association.
Oh.
What are ways we can get involved in this community?
Oh.
We got an acronym issue there, so yes.
Yeah, you're welcome to join the Japanese American Association of Lane County. You're welcome to the community, the Asian American community, is hosting a Lunar New Year Festival next week on February 1st at the Springfield City Hall lobby. You're welcome to come by and we will have several organizations there, the Asian American Foundation of Oregon and the Chinese American Benevolent Association. In fact, if you just want to give me your email, we'll send out invitations to come and join us and be involved. And I can talk with you if there's we're pretty much a cultural community care organization. But if you want to do kind of more active involvement, I can certainly steer you to that too. So thank you.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. So do our panelists have any parting thoughts? There's some great advice. Well, if not, I am going to thank our panelists as well as Alicia for moderating. Can you join me in thanking everyone for their time?
Thank you so much for everyone that came.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.